Hello baseball fans, this video is my all-decade team for the decade of the 2000s. That's a decade from 2000 and ending in 2009. I've also done a team for the 2010s, which you can see on my channel. It starts off with Johan Santana. He had a great decade. This caught most of or all of the really great years of his career fit within the decade, winning the Cy Young Award twice with the Twins, leading his league in ERA 3 times. At catcher for the team is Victor Martinez. He was a great hitting catcher in the beginning of his career. He played DH and first base a lot more towards the end of his career. You see, he had 5 great hitting seasons for the Indians. By the system I use, better than these points are kind of the percent better than average than an average player would be, and a catcher usually is not one of the better hitters on the team. So to have 5 seasons where he gets points like this is very good. 3 seasons more than 20% above average. Those 3 seasons he made the All-Stars. For more information about how the points are developed, you can check out Al's all-time stat details video, which is part of my 2018 playlist. At first base is Albert Pujols. He had an awesome decade, MVP 3 times during the decade, made the All-Stars all but 1 season. He did it with 9 years because he wasn't in the majors in 2000. And he has the most points of anybody on the team. At second base is Jeff Kent. He made the All-Stars 4 times during the decade. He started real strong with the Giants on a championship Giants team, MVP in 2000. At third base was Alex Rodriguez. Alex Rodriguez had an awesome decade, making MVP 3 times, led the league in many categories. I think he led the league in home runs 5 times during the decade, which is amazing. He was a great hitter, made the All-Stars 9 out of the 10 seasons. At shortstop, Derek Jeter, just a model of consistency throughout the decade. Every year was excellent. Made the All-Stars all but 2 seasons, not just a little bit better than average, but much better than average hitting each season. And he's at shortstop, which is usually or traditionally not a strong hitting position. First hitter was Manny Ramirez. First season of the decade, he was finishing up with the Indians. Then he had that run with the Red Sox, one of the leaders of the Red Sox teams that won the World Series. Awesome seasons with the Red Sox. Ending the decade as the best outfielder of all, hitting-wise. Followed by Vladimir Guerrero. Began the decade with the Expos, making the All-Stars the first 3 years. Then he moved over to the Angels and had an MVP season and made the All-Stars 4 more times. Followed by Ichiro Suzuki, who did not play in the majors in 2000, but then made the All-Stars the remaining 9 years of the decade. Led the hits, league in hits 6 times out of the 9 seasons that he played during the decade. Great hitter for every season that he played, and a good fielder too. Among the second page that I have is the next 6 best pitchers and the 3 best hitters for the decade. It begins with Roy Halladay, who was in the Blue Jays and then finished real strong with the Phillies. Pedro Martinez, key part of those championship teams for the Red Sox. Randy Johnson, then Tim Hudson, then Roy Oswalt, followed by Roger Clemens. Roger Clemens is of distinction because I've done this for each decade. I plan to post the 90s and the 80s and the 70s later in the future. But Roger Clemens made the team in the 2000s, in the 90s, and in the 80s. He's the only player that has made an all-decade team for 3 different decades. Among the hitters, we have Todd Helton, who great hitting decade, but he's behind Albert Pujols for first base point-wise, so he doesn't get that first base slot. Followed by Barry Bonds. Barry Bonds also was in a starting outfield spot in the 90s, and here he is. Did great at the beginning of the decade of the 2000s, followed by Maglio Ordonez. So here we see the whole team. The starters are on the left, and then the other players are on the right. And here are the points for the pitchers, just so you can get a little bit of a view of how it worked out, and how they compare to each other point-wise. These points are based primarily on earned run average combined with how many innings you pitch. So you see, like on the bottom, Mariano Rivera was like a first ballot, he got all the unanimous choice for the Hall of Fame. He has 172.2 points. It's harder for him as a relief pitcher to make it based on this system, because he doesn't pitch as many innings as a starting pitcher would pitch during the season. But you see, very close between Santana and Halladay for the first spot. Santana barely edged him out by a couple points. Then Pedro Martinez had awesome seasons the beginning of the decade, but then his career ended. So he was still playing through 2009, but his ERA wasn't better than average, or he didn't pitch enough innings to get points. So he was there. His 76.4 points in 2000, I think, is the highest point total for anybody for a season by the method that I use, like in my lifetime. That year he had a ERA like 1.7 something, and the league ERA was like 4.91. So the difference between his ERA and the league ERA was like over 3 runs. Then he pitched a lot of innings, so that's what results in that really high amount of points. And then you can see, like Randy Johnson the following season, first 3 years of the decade, he had over 50 points, which you need to be like at least 2 runs lower than the league ERA and pitch a lot of innings. And then he had another great season in 2004, but then he kind of tailed off at the end. Hudson had some, I don't know if he had injuries or what, but he had a couple seasons where he didn't have points. And then Oswalt didn't really begin until 2001, and then he kind of tailed off at the end. And then Roger Clemens, I guess that was his career ended in 2007. Then among the pitchers that didn't make the team, well, I don't know that there's really anything of note to say. CC Sabathia played more in the following decade. Rivera did a bit too, and the decade didn't really work out for him time-wise, because he was just beginning his career, and then his prime kind of spanned over 2 different decades. Now, among the hitters, the starters are on the top. The middle is the ones on the second page, and the bottom are the ones that didn't make the team. And catcher Ivan Rodriguez, I realize everybody knows Ivan Rodriguez is one of the greatest fielding catchers of all time, so that's kind of a weakness for this system, because he's just a few points behind Victor Martinez hitting-wise, and he's also a great defender, so a strong case could be made that he should be there instead of Victor Martinez, but Martinez earned it by the point system. George Posada also had a great season catching, a great decade catching, and Joe Mauer he got hurt by just the way the decades line up, because he did great the end of the 2000s decade, and he still was good the beginning of the 2010s decade, but he doesn't line up within these 10 years, so he doesn't make the team. Delgado was close, didn't make it. David Ortiz made the 2010s decade, so he had a lot of points here, and he almost made it on the second page, but not quite. And you see, like Chase Utley, second base, he's another one where he was real strong at the end of the decade. He was still good into the 2010s, but he didn't line up with each year as Jeff Kent then. So it's going to be for the 2000s, then Jeff Kent had a better decade. Chipper Jones, also a great career, but not quite enough points. Same thing with Tejada. Berkman, I remember doing these 10 years ago with the calculation. It was very close between Berkman and Ordonez for the last spot, but Ordonez edged them out. Here's a view of the whole team, points in the middle, and I hope you enjoyed this. If you did, please subscribe to my channel, and I plan to post all of the teams for 2019, which I'm in the middle of doing all-time team updates for 2019, and also the decade teams going back to the 60s. Take care.